Merab! I can't pronounce his last name for shit, but let me tell you, this kid is everything you want in a fighter. Myself, Ray Longo, we love this kid.
Motherfucker. He is a motherfucker, man. That guy does not get tired.
Going on?
There are many ways to win a fight. Some fighters are graced with incredible power, the ability to knock their opponent clean out with a single blow. Others have a submission game that makes the very idea of tangling with them on the ground a suicide mission. But for Merab Dvalishvili, nicknamed the Machine, the key ingredient to his success comes in the form of something a lot more unique. This bantamweight contender has built his entire game around his inhuman levels of stamina, his ability to put a pace on guys that just doesn't seem real. And though we had long suspected that this guy was legit, the way he managed to outwork one of the greatest bantamweights of his era in Petr confirmed that Dvalishvili is a major problem for these other 135-pounders. Born in Tbilisi, Georgia, Merab joins a host of other rising Georgian talents, such as Giga Chikadze, Roman Dolidze, and Guram Kutataladze, in defining a new era of stellar mixed martial artists from the region. Like many other budding fighters, it was self-defense that brought Merab into the fight game, and from an early age, he trained in traditional wrestling, sambo, and judo, giving him the bare essentials to make his eventual transition to mixed martial arts. Though he had no pro experience at the time, Dvalishvili moved to the United States at the age of 21, leaving his home behind him with the goal of eventually becoming a great competitor within the sport. He linked up with the iconic coaching duo of Matt Serra and Ray Longo, and just 2 years later, he made his pro debut. But this is not the type of story that immediately shows the foreshadowing signs of greatness. No, Merab came up short in his pro debut, losing by way of majority decision to Darren Mima. 8 months later, he would indeed rebound with a third-round TKO over Dennis Dombrau. But in his third fight, he would once again lose, this time by way of unanimous decision to Ricky Bandejas, a guy who would eventually go viral for his sweet chin music TKO of James Gallagher in Bellator. Now 1-2 in his first 3 outings, it wasn't exactly the type of form that would indicate a future elite of the weight class. But to his credit, Merab persevered, going 5-0 in a run that included a win over the future UFC-rostered Tony Gravely. A spot on Dana White's Looking for a Fight materialized shortly after, and on the big stage with the cameras rolling, Dvalishvili was about to produce the goods in a huge way. Facing Rafian Stotts, who went on to prove himself to be an excellent fighter in Bellator with an ongoing 7-fight win streak, Merab shocked Dana White with a huge spinning back fist KO to earn his first UFC contract. But if you think this is a story about an instant success, think again. Merab would lose in his debut against Frankie Saenz, before then coming up short in the most dramatic way possible against Ricky Simon. In that fight, Simon would have Merab in a guillotine that just went on and on and on. And as the third round winded down and eventually ended, fans were shocked to see that Dvalishvili had gone out, just as the buzzer sounded. The official result of this fight of the night winning clash was a submission loss for Merab at 5 minutes of round 3. Once again, this Georgian prospect looked set to go on a losing streak, with his 0-2 record in the UFC looking pretty poor, all things considered. But this was truly where Dvalishvili's journey to stardom began. He started to pick up momentum, scoring wins on fight night cards against commendable opposition with Brad Katana, Casey Kenny, and John Dodson. And a big victory over Cody Stamann certainly put Merab's name into full view. But it was his fight with Marlon Moraes, the former World Series of Fighting champion and one-time UFC bantamweight title challenger. Yeah, this was the one that made a lot of us sit up and take note. As only his second UFC pay-per-view appearance since his signing, Merab was once again forced to deal with some very real adversity. Moraes caught him badly several times in the first round, forcing Dvalishvili into a real panic situation. But Merab has been there before. He has failed in moments that he should have found success in, and after weathering Moraes' storm, and trust us, it was one hell of a storm, he eventually found his momentum, TKOing the Brazilian in the second round. But the greatest test of all would soon come. A matchup against the resurgent José Aldo, one of the all-time greats of the featherweight division, reborn as a legit bantamweight contender. This fight took place at Elevation, and through this card, you could just see how the stamina of so many of the event's competitors was affected. But for Merab, this actually worked in his favor. The fight itself was a real Dvalishvili kind of affair. He relentlessly worked to tire out this future Hall of Famer, sapping at his gas tank with every takedown attempt, with every harrowing exchange up against the fence. In the end, Aldo could not get his game going, and unfortunately with this defeat, he opted to leave the UFC and MMA as a whole behind him. All of a sudden, the bantamweight division had a new top contender on its hands. And his reward? A fight with a guy that many still saw as the uncrowned king of the weight class. Petr Yan is something more akin to a fighting supercomputer than anything else. A masterful striker who has an ability to make reads that is totally unmatched within this division. In there with one of the most talented fighters of his generation, Merab just crashed onto Petr Yan like water onto a rock. He shot in for 49 takedowns on the former champ, not even worrying too much about getting them all. But instead, we were watching this man truly weaponize his cardio. Yan is just about as good a striker as you will ever see in the UFC, but in the face of his constant assault, he eventually started to wilt. In fact, he didn't even get a chance to get his game going. Even when Dvalishvili was standing, the threat of the takedown loomed large, causing noticeable discomfort to Yan's own offense. Fights are often won and lost on gas tanks, and Merab, with this performance, earned his reputation as perhaps the most deadly attrition-based fighter in the game. It was a huge win, maybe not an upset victory per se, but enough of a showcase for Dvalishvili to really get some respect on his name. Now staring down at all of the other contenders beneath him, Merab's ongoing friendship with his longtime training partner and fellow Serra-Longo product Aljamain Sterling is apparently enough to see him reject the idea of a title shot. But by the sound of things, Aldo is looking at a move up to the featherweight division once he fights Henry Cejudo. And with that in mind, it may not actually be too long before we see the machine stepping in there for a shot at UFC Gold. This guy has an incredible motor, folks. A truly unique fighting specimen who managed to prove himself against a guy in Yan who some still see as the best bantamweight on the planet, regardless of his losses. It's going to take one hell of an effort to beat this guy over 5 rounds, instead of tiring as bouts go on. If anything, Merab grows in intensity. A terrifying prospect for any potential opponent. Signing to fight Merab Dvalishvili is always going to introduce some very unique questions, and if you don't have the ability to keep him off you, it's going to be a very, very long night. Don't make the mistake of underestimating this man and his approach again, that's for sure. If you enjoyed watching the rise of Merab Dvalishvili, we'd like to recommend another video that we think you'll enjoy. Check out the rise of Shavkat Rakhmonov, a welterweight start with a 100% finish rate. So be sure to click the link on your screen. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.